The queen was crying and rolling on the floor. Who could have done this to my son? Who did this to my son? She cried. On the other hand, Asa was in her room, panting and walking to and fro. Her heart was drumming so hard that it could explode any moment. She was so scared. God, what have I done? What have I done? What if he dies? What if something bad happens to Prince Uzo? Ah, Asa, you are finished. You should have been more careful now. Why did you have to hit him? Oh my God. She placed her two hands on her head as she panicked, and she sat on the bed. Fear gripped her so much that she couldn't even step her feet outside of her room. How will she face everyone? How will she look them in the face and explain to them that it wasn't intentional? Everything, every single thing was just moving from bad to worse. What kind of a thing is this one now? Prince Uzo, why can't you just keep your pim to yourself? Now, look at where it has landed you. Look at what you've done to yourself. Ah, God. She panted and stood up, then sat again. Few days later, the prince was back to his feet, and the day he returned from the hospital, the whole palace was so overjoyed. The queen was the most happiest to see him come back, though there were plasters everywhere on his forehead. He angrily walked into the palace and started searching everywhere. Where is Asa? He thundered in a very huge rage. Everyone were so surprised to see him react that way. My son, what is the problem? Why are you so angry and asking after Asa? The queen asked. Wait, don't tell me it's what I'm thinking. She stopped halfway. At that point, Asa slowly walked out from her room to the parlor. Everybody all turned to her and back to the prince. She's the one. She's the one that did this to me. She wanted to kill me because I exposed her to the village, he said, and everyone shouted in shock. No, my king, my queen, it's not what you think. It's not like that. I, I, she tried to explain, but she just couldn't find the right words to use. So, Asa, you have the right. You have the effrontery. You have the utmost right to try to kill my son. After killing my Ike, you tried to kill the other one. What wrong did I ever do to you that you had to repay me back like this? So you were sent. You came into my family to kill, to steal and to destroy. Ah! The queen lamented in shock. Asa immediately went on her knees. My king, my queen, please, it is not so. No, she cried. Because of what happened to the prince that day, I shifted your swearing day until the prince is back to his feet. And now that he's back, your swearing has been fixed again in 3 days' time. I am tired of your nonsense and evil attitude in my palace. I cannot wait to see you have a taste of your own medicine. I cannot wait for the gods to deal with you mercilessly, the king said and angrily walked away. Everyone walked out of the palace, remaining Princess Ada. Ada slowly walked down to where Asa sat on the ground and placed her hands on her shoulder. Don't worry, dear. Everything is going to be fine, okay? I believe you are innocent, so you don't have to worry about anything. The gods shall vindicate you, okay? I can't wait for your swearing day so that the truth will finally come out that you are innocent. I can't wait for that day, she said with a smile, and Asa immediately hugged her. Thank you so much, my princess. Sincerely, I really don't know what I would have done without you. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have someone like you in this palace. You are the only one that believed in my innocence. Thank you so much. Not everyone is like you, she said, and Princess Ada immediately hugged her. It's fine, it's nothing, she said. stroking her bald hair. 3 days later, the swearing day of Asa finally arrived, and the villagers were all present outside the king's palace. No one would want to miss such an interesting and important sight. Every villagers in Umachi Kingdom wanted to witness what they've all been waiting for. They were expectant. They were negatively excited. Everybody had what they all wanted the outcome to be, and they wouldn't mind leaving their husbands, wives, and children to behold such a great sight. The king, the queen, and the princesses were all standing at the frontage of the palace. Prince Uzo stood with his hands folded on his chest. Asa was in the middle. She was dressed in a white garment. She was barefooted, and a calabash was placed on her shaved head while she knelt. Everybody waited for the chief priest until he finally arrived. An old man with a brown cloth tied from his shoulder down his knees. His 2 ears and neck were adorned with white cowries. There was a whitish circle mark drawn on his left eye with the aid of a chalk. His teeth was looking yellowish. Anytime he opened it, it shone brightly to the sight of people. He slowly walked into the center backwardly while making some serious incantations. He would sometimes look at the sky and back to the ground, making incantations and speaking in a language none of them could understand. He lifted his staff up to the sky and made some incantation, brought it back to the ground and stamped it on the ground. My king, my queen. He turned to the king and greeted them. You are welcome, Eye of the Gods. The king answered, and he turned almost immediately back to Asa, who was still on the ground. Young lady, before we go on with the swearing, we are going to be asking you the same question again. Did you kill your husband or not? The chief priest asked. I did not kill Prince Ikem, she said. The chief priest looked at her and shook her head. Young lady, let me remind you that you are standing before the gods of our land. Our God does not have mercy on anyone who lies before him. He is just and fair and does not pity anyone, even though you are pregnant. The wrath of the gods are very strong, like a mighty wind. Now, I will ask you the same question again. Did you kill Prince Ikenga or not? He asked, and Asa immediately shook her head. I did not kill my late husband, Prince Ikenga. I would never do anything like that, she confidently said, and the chief priest nodded and picked up the old-looking staff and stretched it to her. Take this staff and repeat after me, he said, and she collected the staff. I, put your name. If I ever had any hand in the death of the late crown prince, let the gods strike me right now. But if I did not have anything to do with it, let me go scot-free and let the culprit be punished. The chief priest said, and Asa held the staff and closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. After a while, she opened her eyes. I, Asa, if I ever had any hand in the death of the late crown prince, let the gods strike me right now. But if I did not have anything to do with it, let me go scot-free and let the culprit be punished, she said, and dropped the staff. Everyone stood waiting for what will happen, but nothing happened. Everywhere was so quiet as the cloud was steady. The chief priest looked shocked, likewise every other person. So she is innocent? She did not kill Prince Ikenga? So she has been innocent all along. The villagers continued to murmur among themselves. They folded their arms and refused to believe that Asa was innocent. Some began to feel guilty for treating Asa badly in the past. Oh, how the poor girl have suffered so much. I said it. They continued to converse and lowly talk among themselves. The king, the queen, likewise the princesses, looked shocked. But why has the culprit not been punished? One of the villagers threw the question. Are you sure that she's really innocent? Why has the culprit not been punished yet? Another one threw the question at the chief priest again. The king looked at the whole scenario confusingly and immediately turned to the chief priest for clarity as well. My chief priest, eye of the gods, please, can you tell us what is happening here? If she is truly innocent, why hasn't the ghost punished the culprit yet? The king asked. The chief priest looked at everyone and carried his staff. He started making some incantations that none of them could understand. He sat down on the floor and spread the cowries on the ground. He continued to do the incantations while singing in a dialect none of them could interpret. After he was done, he stood up and turned to everyone. The gods are silent, he said, and the king looked at him confusingly. Eye of the gods, why is the gods silent? Please, can you tell us? We want to know. The chief priest made a very bitter face and looked at everyone. Everywhere is very dark. I can see darkness, only darkness. The gods have refused to say anything. There are only thick smoke everywhere, everywhere, he said. At that point, the queen immediately made an angry face from where she stood. You see, I thought as much. The gods are silent, that's why she was not punished. My people of Omachi, nobody should believe this wretched thing here on the ground. She is nothing but a big time liar. I know that there is a big mistake somewhere. The gods can never be silent. No one should listen to anything she says. She's the one that killed my son. That's all I know. She thundered from where she stood. The king tried to hold her to calm down, but she immediately shrugged her shoulders away from him. She walked up to where Asa sat on the ground and pointed her index finger at her. You, don't even try to play too much innocence here, because I know that you are the one that killed my son, Ikenga, and I am going to make sure that you are exposed so that the whole village will know who you are. She angrily said and finally stormed out of the scene. The chief priest looked at her from where he stood and started dancing and singing, making his usual incantation and leaving the palace without saying a word. The king, though still looking confused, dismissed the whole villagers and everyone went home. All the royals walked into the palace except Princess Ada, who immediately started walking slowly towards where she sat. When she reached, she squat down and placed her hand on her shoulders. I am so happy for you. At least, you weren't punished or banished at all, she said with a smile, and Asa immediately released a smile and hugged her. I am so happy as well, my princess. But why were the gods silent? She couldn't help but ask. Oh, please, don't let that one bother you. Maybe the gods are silent because of your innocence. Maybe because you are so innocent to the fact that it cannot even open its mouth to talk. She explained, and Asa immediately smiled. After she was done, Princess Ada walked back into the palace and into her room. Immediately she entered her room, her face immediately changed. But how did this happen? Yes, I know that she did not kill the prince, but I thought I went to bribe the chief priest yesterday. So how come he didn't do anything to make her guilty? She asked and sat down on her chair, looking into her mirror, confusing and angrily. In the queen's room, she was panting and endlessly walking to and fro. How? How did she go scot-free? How is she innocent? No, I don't want her to be innocent, no matter what. I don't want her to be innocent. She killed my son, and she must be punished for it. Yes, she killed my son. I can't let her just go like that. She angrily scattered her hair and pushed everything that was on the table in her room away. Asa cannot escape. No, she cannot, she said, and immediately stood up, still looking restless. That night, the queen sneaked out of the palace, but she was only able to do that by bribing the gateman and passing through the gate. She wore a long black garment, covering herself from head to toe. She walked steadily and creepily until she reached a shrine that night in the neighboring village. When she reached the old tattered looking shrine, the whole place was reeking of smell of which the gods actually adored. There was an old red decoration as the place was constructed in a square way. The chief priest sat down on the floor, making some of his unknown incantations and speaking to the gods to speak back to him. While doing that, the queen entered the sacred place and immediately started tabling her worries to him. Eye of the gods, my name is Queen Obianichu from Umachi Kingdom. I have a very big worry in my life right now. My son Ikenga, the late crown prince of Umachi Kingdom, died some weeks back and his wife killed him. But today, she was revealed to be innocent. My problem here is I do not want her to be innocent even though she is. I want her to suffer instead because I do not like her. I want her to be the one that killed my son and not anyone else, she angrily said, and the chief priest looked at her and began to make some incantation to the gods and sing to the gods. My queen, I have heard all you've said, but wouldn't you want to hear at least who killed your son? At least, shouldn't that be your first priority and nothing else? The chief priest asked her, and she immediately shook her head. Eye of the gods, I do not care about who killed my son Ikenga. All I want is for Asa to be punished. One of your children killed your son, the chief priest said, cutting her in. The queen immediately looked up in surprise and back to the ground. At first, she was silent. Then she spoke up. The more reason why you should make Asa the guilty one. My children cannot face the wrath of the gods. That would be a shameful thing to the royal palace, she said, and the chief priest nodded and began to make incantations of all kind. He called Asa's name while shining his old black-looking teeth. As he hit the gong, he would call Asa's name and continue speaking to the gods and making some incantations. After he was done, he looked up at the queen. My queen, it is done. Your problems and worries are over. Go. Tomorrow morning, your results is awaiting you, he said, and the queen immediately knelt down and thanked him so much, then left the place, smiling happily. The following morning, when Asa woke up from sleep, she stood up from her bed and tried to walk out from her room. At that point, thunder immediately struck from the cloud and into the room, and she fell to the floor. The queen mother in her room, who was expectantly waiting, hearing the thunder blast so loudly, immediately ran to Asa's room. She saw Asa lying lifelessly on the floor. She quickly let out a scream. I said it! I said it, oh! The people of Umachi, I said it! She shouted as everyone immediately rushed to the scene in shock. The people in the palace let out a shocking face as they saw Asa lying on the floor with foam coming out from her mouth. Within few minutes, the news already spread like wildfire round the whole village. Every villager cursed at Asa and prayed that she would suffer forever for killing their late prince. Some even regretted ever believing her. I knew that the gods would never disappoint. He will always do justice for his people, they talked. The king was so enraged to have heard that Asa was really behind the death of Ikenga. He vowed to make her life miserable. The villagers gathered round at the palace that particular day under the very hot and scorching sun. Asa was in the middle, with severe pains. Her stomach had already popped out a little. We want her to be banished from this kingdom. Yes, we want her to be banished. She killed our crown prince. She must be banished. They kept on yelling with rage as they pointed at Asa on the ground. The king mercilessly looked at the whole scenario and finally made his judgment. My son, Prince Ikenga, the late crown prince of this kingdom, was a very nice and gentle prince who only thought of nothing but for the good of the people. He was very resilient, humble, and the best prince ever. But you chose to kill him. You chose to take him away from us. For that reason, I, the current and the reigning king of Umachi kingdom, hereby banish you from this kingdom, he declared, and the villagers supported him. Asa could only sat down crying, with no help from anyone. Her face was designed and soiled with dirt. Leave our kingdom. We don't need you any longer. You are a curse to us. Get out. They shouted in rage as they began throwing different things they could grab at her. At that moment, there was thunder and lightning, and immediately, rain started falling heavily. Asa cried as she made her way out of the village. Asa's banishment from Umwachi spread like wildfire. The villagers wore a fulfilled and satisfied look on their faces immediately they heard that Asa had been banished from the kingdom. The chief priest, after hearing such a wild news, got really upset and barged into the king's palace immediately. What have you all done? Do you know the level of calamity you have caused? My king, why didn't you summon me, the chief priest, first before making such a rash decision? He had angrily asked the moment he saw the king and everyone present at the palace. I thought that was the right thing to do. I mean, she killed our late prince. There was a confirmation this morning when the thunder struck. She needed to be banished so that Umuachi will not have any stain and so that a curse would not come upon us. The king explained, and the chief priest looked at them all and shook his head pitifully at them. Well, a curse have already come upon you all. What? They all exclaimed. How? How is that possible, eye of the gods? What did we do wrong? The king asked, and the chief priest only looked at everyone, shook his head once again, and walked out of the palace in silence. After Asa was banished from Umachi kingdom, the land became calm again, in fact calmer than before. Some began to say that it was Asa's presence in the village that made everywhere heavy and disorganized, with no peace. But now that she was gone, they were more fulfilled and happy as they moved on with their lifestyle like nothing had happened. One day, the queen called all her children to a sacred place for a brief meeting. They all wondered why their mother would call them out like that. It's something she had never done before, even when they were very little. She had never for once asked them out for any sacred meeting. Then why now? They all wondered. That night, they all assembled in a sacred place inside the palace. Which of you killed my son? She instantly threw the question at them immediately they had arrived. Which of you killed Ikenga, your brother? She asked again, but all they could do was to keep quiet and just look at her. Didn't you hear me? I said, which of you killed my son Ikenga, your brother? She shouted, already angry with tears rolling down from her eyes. It's not me, oh, Princess Ada said. It's not me either, Princess Ola said. The queen turned to Prince Uzo, waiting for his own reply, but all he could do was to keep quiet and only look at them. I killed him, he finally said with no remorse written on his face. What? The queen exclaimed, unbelievably. You killed your own brother? How? How could you, Uzo? That was your brother, for God's sake, the queen thundered with so much anger written on her face. Who cares? I needed to be king, okay? And besides, Ikenga and I have never been on the same page ever since we were born. And remember, you were the one that told us we should always try with all we can to eliminate anything that tries to stand on our way. So I took their advice seriously and I did as I was told by you. He explained, and the queen only looked at him unbelievably. Why are you so foolish? I said that when you all were small, and besides, I wasn't referring to family. I meant outsiders. Outsiders, not for you to eliminate family members, she said and sat down, tapping her foot on the ground. Do you know the level and the length I had to go through in order to clean up the whole mess you've caused? She asked, but Prince Uzo only looked at her, still with no remorse written on his face. I still don't feel any sympathy for killing Ike. He needed to die so I can ascend the throne. He was never my family. I never took him as one, so don't call him that, he said angrily and walked out. The queen kept on looking at him as his figure disappeared unbelievably. When Princess Ada went back to her room, she sat down before her mirror and stared at herself. So Uzo killed Ikenga, she said, wearing an unbelievable look on her face. Wow! She gradually let out a smile. So he too wants to be king, she said, and immediately let out a laugh. Well, I'm sorry, dear. I think you are going to join your brother in the grave. I am the only one who can become king. Why must it always be male alone to become king? I must also be king, she said as she brought out a bottle containing some poisonous substance and smiled at it. The following morning, maids woke up as early as they would and began to do their chores. When it was 8 a.m., one of the maids served Prince Uzo's food on the dining table and went to call him in his room. Immediately she left. A secret door creaked open and Princess Ada slowly and steadily tiptoed out of her room. She made her way to where the food was, opened it, brought out the bottled substance from her dress and emptied it into the food. After eating this food, you will die, Uzo. I am the only one who can become king. No one else. Go and join your brother in the grave, she said and immediately ran out of the place back to her room. When she got into her room, she danced happily and fell on her bed looking fulfilled. On the other hand, Prince Uzo finally came out of his room looking energized to eat. He sat down, washed his hand, opened the food and started eating happily. He nodded his head happily as he consumed the sumptuous meal he was having. While eating, he started feeling uncomfortable somewhere around his stomach. He would gulp the glass of water that was there and continued eating, ignoring it. At a point, the uncomfortability converted to a severe pain that he couldn't endure any longer. Ah! He screamed. He immediately let out a scream holding his stomach. My stomach! He screamed again. The pain was so severe that all over his stomach were aching really bad. It felt as if his whole intestine wanted to come out at that point. He suddenly fell to the ground. He screamed out so loud again. That was when everyone heard his voice and they all immediately ran to the scene. Before then, he was already vomiting blood. Ah! The queen and the king screamed in fright looking at the horrible scene in front of them. Princess Olama and Princess Ada also ran out of their room and were also looking shocked as well. What happened to my son? Uzo, wake up! The queen called, already crying and shaking his body for him to wake up. Quickly, guards! Call the royal ambulance! The king immediately ordered in rage. The guards did as they were told, and within few minutes, the royal ambulance arrived and Prince Uzo was immediately carried away to the hospital. Nobody could move an inch. Their heartbeat increased, thinking of the worst thing that could happen to Prince Uzo. The queen fell on the floor, crying so hard. The king panted to and fro restlessly. Oh, gods of our land, why all this torture? First, it was my first son, Ikenga, and now it's my second son, Uzo. What wrong did I do to deserve all this torture? He cried out in pain, kneeling down and looking up into the sky. At that point, some villagers ran into the palace, carrying their lifeless looking loved ones and crying so hard. My king, my only son is dead. My king, my wife was bitten by a snake today when she went to the farm. My king, my only brother was found dead on his way to the stream today. They all cried out, relying all their problems to the king at that same time. The king was so confused as he looked at all of them at the same time. He couldn't understand what was happening at that point. Gods of our land, what is happening? Nothing of this has ever happened before. Why all this now? He cried out in agony as he fell down on his knees and looked up to the sky once again with so much pain visible in his eyes. The village of Omachi was in trouble. People were getting sick every day with strange illness, and no one knew why. The sickness had taken many lives, and the villagers were very scared. The king was very worried. He knew he had to do something to save his people. One sunny morning, the king decided to call on the chief priest. The chief priest was a very wise man. He knew many things about the gods and spirits. He lived in a small hut at the edge of the village. The king set his guards to bring the chief priest to the palace. When the chief priest arrived, the king welcomed him and said, "Great chief priest, our people are dying. A strange sickness is spreading through our village. We need your help to find out why this is happening." The chief priest looked serious. He closed his eyes and began to chant softly. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes and said, "I need to see the palace. There may be answers hidden there." The king led the chief priest through the palace. They walked through many rooms until they reached the king's chamber. The chief priest stopped and looked around carefully. He suddenly pointed to a spot on the floor. "There is a blood here," the chief priest said. "The place is full of blood, stains of blood and secrets. The future heir to the throne of Umachi is suffering in a strange land. The voice of an innocent is crying to the gods for vengeance." The king was shocked. What does this mean? Asa was wrongly accused and banished. The chief priest responded, "What can we do to stop the sickness and make things right?" he asked. The chief priest thought for a moment and then said, "The gods are angry because of what had happened to Asa and her son. You must send men to find them. Only then will the gods be pleased and the sickness will stop." As they were talking, a loud scream came from inside the palace. The king and the chief priest rushed to see what had happened. They found Princess Ada and the queen lying on the floor, struck with a strange illness. The king knelt beside them and wept. "Not my family too," he cried. "What can I do to save them?" The chief priest put his hand on the king's shoulder and said, "We must act quickly. Send men to find Asa and her son. That is the first step. The gods will take it from there." The king wiped his tears and called his guards. He told them to gather a group of strong men to search for Asa and her son. The guards hurried to follow the king's order. A few hours later, a group of men set out to find Asa and her son. They traveled through forests and crossed rivers, asking everyone they met if they had seen Asa and her son. The journey was long and hard, but the men did not give up. They knew that finding Asa and her son was the only way to save their village. Back in Umachi kingdom, the king stayed by his family's side. The queen and Princess Ada were very sick, and the king prayed to the gods to spare their lives. He knew that the future of his village depended on finding Asa and her son. The chief priest stayed in the palace offering prayers and making sacrifices to the gods. He knew that the gods were angry and needed to be appeased. He also knew that the king's men had a difficult task ahead of them. Days turned into weeks, and the sickness continued to spread. More and more people fell ill, and the villagers grew more frightened. The king tried to stay hopeful, but it was hard. He missed his wife and daughters, who were too sick to leave their beds. One day, as the king sat by the queen's side, a messenger arrived. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, "the men have found Asa and her son. They are on their way back to the village." The king felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank the gods," he said, "we must prepare for their arrival." The next day, the men returned to Umachi with Asa and her son. Asa looked tired and worried, but she was relieved to be back in their village. Her son, little Chike, held her hand tightly. The king welcomed Asa and her son warmly. "Thank you for coming back," he said. The chief priest said that the gods are angry because of what had happened to you. "We need your help to make things right." Asa nodded. "I have heard all that has been going on in the land. I will do whatever I can to help," she said. "I want the sickness to stop, and I want our village to be safe again." After Asa and her son returned to Umachi, the chief priest announced that a special ritual must be performed to lift the curse and stop the sickness. The villagers gathered in the main square, eager to see the ritual and hopeful that it would bring an end to their sufferings. The chief priest began the ritual by calling Princess Ada forward. He looked at her with piercing eyes and said, "Princess Ada, you must confess your sins. If you do not, you will surely die." Princess Ada hesitated. She looked around at the crowd, her face pale. Finally, she spoke in a faint voice. "I killed Uzo." The villagers were in shock. "Aro!" they all shouted, which means abomination in their language. The king was stunned. He could hardly believe his ears. You killed Uzo?" he asked, his voice shaking. Princess Ada continued, "I was also the one who stole the sacred staff and hid it in Asa's bag." Asa's eyes widened in disbelief. "Gods of our land," she screamed, "and you have been acting so nice to me." "You are wicked," Asa cried out, holding her son tightly. Princess Ada looked down, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to be the first female king," she admitted. Before you know it, Princess Ada suddenly screamed, saying she couldn't see anything. She collapsed, and the guards had to support her. The queen, the king, the elders, and the villagers were shocked to learn that Princess Ada was the one who killed her brother Uzo. The chief priest warned that she would stay blind until she proved herself a good person, or else she would die too. Everyone was stunned, and the guards had to hold the princess so that she doesn't fall to the ground. One of the elders stepped forward and said, "Abomination! Women don't sit on the throne of Umachi." The chief priest then began to tell the rest of the story. The queen knew that Uzo killed Ikenga and also tried to harm Asa, but she covered it up. Instead, she paid a bribe to a medicine man to forge the anger of the gods against Asa. The villagers shouted in disbelief. They could not believe that the queen and Princess Ada had done such terrible things. The chief priest continued, "The queen's action brought the wrath of the gods upon us. The sickness and death were punishment for these evil deeds." The villagers turned to Asa and her son, their faces filled with regret and sorrow. They all apologized to Asa, who forgave them freely. We must learn from this and never let such evil happen again, Asa said gently. The chief priest then carried out the ritual. He chanted prayers and made offerings to the gods, asking for their forgiveness. Slowly, the dark cloud that had hung over Umachi lifted. The sickness stopped spreading, and the people who were ill began to recover. The village returned to its peaceful ways. The king called a meeting of the elders and the villagers. We have been through a terrible time, he said, but we must now look to the future. We must make sure such things never happen again. The villagers agreed. They promised to be honest and kind, to look out for each other and to honor the gods. A few days later, in a grand ceremony, little Chike was crowned the prince of Umachi. The villagers cheered and celebrated. They knew that Chike would grow up to be a good and just leader. The queen and Princess Ada were filled with regret for their actions. They did everything they could to show that they were sorry and they had changed. They helped the villagers, worked very hard to make things right, and prayed for forgiveness. In time, the village of Omachi found peace and happiness again. The people learned to trust each other and to live in harmony. They knew that as long as they stayed true to their values, the gods would protect them. And so, Umachi became a place where kindness and honesty were cherished, and where the lesson of the past ensured a bright future for everyone. The most important lesson in this story is the power of truth and forgiveness in healing a community. The tale illustrates how deceit and wrongdoing can lead to suffering and chaos, but confession and repentance can pave the way for redemption. It shows that even the gravest mistakes can be forgiven and peace can be restored when people take responsibility for their actions, seek forgiveness, and commit to making amends. Ultimately, it emphasizes the values of honesty, justice, and unity in building a harmonious and thriving community. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.